The basic idea behind d4 is that we'd like to bring another pawn to the center with e4. And of course the understanding of the black's move d5 is obvious in that case, preventing pawn to e4. But again, playing c4 and entering so-called Queen's Gambit shows you the intention of white of actually reaching e4 again, with the pawn eventually getting there after black captures on c4. So we're hoping that black is going to do that and allow us to bring the second pawn into the center. Let's take a look and see how it works on the board. So d pawn takes c4 and white just puts the pawn on e4. Now we are happy, having much more space, but being down a pawn. Now if white recaptures the pawn on c4 soon, that would be just having two pawns in the center with equal material. It looks like an excellent situation for white. So this would be really the idea behind the Queen's Gambit. But sometimes you see white decides to go for not e4 but slower movement of this pawn on the e file, going first to e3. This is because of a certain concern that white may end up defending these pawns for a long time, because these two pawns at the moment are not being supported by other pieces. So black may start attacking them right there from the start of the game and will be kind of in a situation to only defend. And if you're not happy trying to defend your pawns that you just wanted to bring into the center, you may go and do something a little bit different, playing first e3, solidifying the one on d4, developing your pieces first, castling, and then pushing e4, forming again beautiful center, only with the one a little tempo down. And I'm going to show you actually what else this pawn push to e3 holds behind. So this e3 is also attacking the pawn on c4 with the bishop from f1, and let's assume that black is going to react defending it with the pawn to b5. Now since black kind of moved the pawn from d5 to c4 and abandoned the center, they're thinking, well, at least they can hold that extra pawn, and that way that may compensate what they lost in the center. Well, after b5, white is still going with an idea of recapturing on c4, but in order for that to happen they need to remove the one on b5, and that's going to happen by not going with the knight to c3, because then black can just decide which one of these two pawns to move and defend the pawn on b5 without any risk. We're going to go instead with the a4. This move is challenging the pawn on b5 in a more serious way. Now if black captures that pawn on a4, they're going to be separating all these four pawns. All of them are really weak, and after white just captures one on c4, we're going to be down a pawn, but that pawn is the one on a4 that's going to easily fall after knight c3, and then we can choose either with a queen or the knight or a rook take on a4. Or we can just take it immediately with a4, queen a4 or rook a4. After capturing that pawn, we're not going to be behind in material, we're just going to be better in the center, having 2 versus 1. Let's go back. Black is not happy with that. Instead, they're thinking of a6, but then we just take on b5, and suddenly black is realizing that there is no way they can capture back because the rook on a8 is falling. Let's see how that looks on the board. Takes, takes, and rook takes rook. So you see that's not possible for black. Instead they will play probably c6. And I can tell you that I've been here as white so many times, and I would be going for a takes b5, and after c takes b5 there is a nice trick, and these arrows are showing that the rook is going to fall most likely after this move queen f3. Well, there is a way for black to survive with the rook, but they need to throw a piece in front of the white's queen. For example, going with the bishop here, after which white captures it for free, of course, and then black puts the knight on d7, connecting these two heavy pieces and not losing their rook this way. But they're going to lose another pawn, and the game is completely winning for white. Let's go back to this situation. So let's say after c4 black decides not to take on c4, but actually they like to defend this pawn with another piece, which is, let's say, knight. A knight going to f6. Thinking that in case of white's c takes d5, they can choose to take either with a knight or with a queen. Let's say queen takes d5. Definitely we're going to be getting this free move with the knight, knight c3, attacking the queen. Queen goes back, let's say, all the way back to d8, or we just get a possibility to push 2 squares ahead with the e-pawn and form a beautiful center that we wanted from the start. Let's look at it in the board. So d4 and e4, and white has an advantage. Going back, as we said, we took the pawn on d5, and black is going to recapture, let's say, with this knight that just got out to f6. But what is wrong now for black is that simply having a knight on d5 is not going to prevent us from pushing the pawn and form beautiful center that we again wanted from the start. So we just push e4 and we enjoy a beautiful position with a much better center. So what is the best way for black to react to the second move c4? Assuming that taking the pawn is not that good, although it's an okay opening, but you need to know how to play it as black. However, let's say black chooses another strategy, holding the center. How to hold the center by black? They need to keep the pawn on d5. It must be replaced by another pawn of black. Well, that's gonna be with either c6, which is in that case so-called Slav defense, or they can play e6, so-called Queen's Gambit declined. Now, it's worth mentioning that in case of e6, c takes d5, black is just gonna recapture with the e-pawn, free up the light square bishop, but more importantly the pawn on d5 is preventing white from pushing to e4. Therefore, white often decides not to capture on d5 and just keep playing with 2 pawns on the 4th rank versus 1 black on the 5th and 1 on the 6th rank, thinking that, well, as white, we have a little advantage at least in the center and space. That's in case of e6. In case of c6, we can more clearly see that white is enjoying more space, because on this 4th rank we can see again white's 2 pawns standing, while on the black side you can see only 1 on the 5th and 1 on the 6th rank.